Japan's pre-World War II era was marked by significant political and social changes that set the stage for its later involvement in World War II. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Japan underwent a period of rapid modernization and industrialization known as the Meiji Restoration. This period saw the country transition from a feudal society to a modern nation-state, adopting Western technologies and institutions to strengthen its economy and military. By the 1930s, Japan had emerged as a major regional power in East Asia, with a growing sense of nationalism and militarism among its population. One interesting fact is that during this time, Japan experienced a population boom, with its population nearly doubling from around 35 million in 1873 to over 70 million by 1930. This demographic shift placed strain on the country's resources and contributed to its imperial ambitions in the region. Another interesting detail is that Japan's economy also experienced rapid growth during this period, with industries such as textiles, steel, and shipbuilding flourishing. By the late 1930s, Japan had become one of the world's leading industrial powers, exporting goods to markets around the globe. However, this economic success was accompanied by growing social inequality and political unrest, as the gap between rich and poor widened and calls for democratic reform grew louder. These internal tensions, combined with external pressures from Western powers, fueled Japan's expansionist policies in Asia and ultimately led to its entry into World War II. By the eve of the war, Japan had established a vast empire that included territories in China, Korea, and Southeast Asia, setting the stage for the conflict that would engulf the world in the coming years. The rise of militarism in Japan during the early 20th century was a complex and multifaceted phenomenon that had profound implications for the country's domestic politics and foreign policy. One interesting aspect of this period was the growing influence of the military establishment in Japanese society. By the 1930s, the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had become powerful political forces in their own right, with significant control over key government ministries and decision-making processes. This militarization of Japanese politics was fueled by a combination of factors, including the country's rapid industrialization, territorial ambitions in Asia, and perceived threats from Western powers. One interesting detail is that the military's rise to prominence was accompanied by a cult of personality around certain military leaders, such as General Hideki Tojo, who would later become Prime Minister of Japan and a key architect of the country's war strategy in World War II. Another interesting aspect of Japan's militarization was the impact it had on Japanese society as a whole. The military's increasing influence led to the suppression of political dissent and the promotion of nationalist ideologies that glorified war and sacrifice for the nation. This shift towards militarism was reflected in popular culture as well, with films, literature, and propaganda promoting the virtues of military service and loyalty to the emperor. In terms of numbers and statistics, military spending in Japan skyrocketed during this period, with defense expenditures increasing from around 4% of GDP in the early 1930s to over 30% by the late 1930s. This massive investment in the military not only strained Japan's economy, but also heightened tensions with other major powers, particularly the United States. By the late 1930s, Japan's military had become one of the largest and most technologically advanced in the world, with a navy that rivaled even that of the British Royal Navy in terms of size and firepower. The militarization of Japanese society also had a profound impact on the country's foreign policy, as the military sought to expand Japan's influence in Asia through a series of aggressive military campaigns. These campaigns, which included the invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and the subsequent occupation of China, marked a significant departure from Japan's previous foreign policy of non-intervention and diplomacy. The rise of militarism in Japan ultimately set the stage for the country's entry into World War II and its subsequent defeat at the hands of the Allied powers. The legacy of this period continues to shape Japan's national identity and its approach to defense and security to this day. In the years leading up to Japan's involvement in World War II, a series of events unfolded that would ultimately propel the country into a global conflict with far-reaching consequences. One interesting detail is the Mukden Incident of 1931, when Japanese military officers staged a false flag attack on a railway in Manchuria as a pretext for the subsequent invasion and occupation of the region. This event marked the beginning of Japan's aggressive expansionist policies in East Asia and set the stage for further military interventions in the years to come. Another significant event was the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937, which sparked a full-scale war between Japan and China and led to the brutal Japanese occupation of large parts of the country. The conflict would continue for 8 years and result in widespread devastation and loss of life on both sides. In terms of numbers and statistics, the Second Sino-Japanese War, which began in 1937, would become one of the deadliest conflicts of the 20th century, with estimates of civilian and military casualties ranging from several million to over 20 million. The scale of the conflict and the atrocities committed by Japanese forces, such as the infamous Nanjing Massacre of 1937, shocked the international community and further isolated Japan diplomatically. As Japan's military campaigns in China escalated, tensions with Western powers, particularly the United States, also grew. One interesting fact is that in response to Japan's aggression in Asia, the United States imposed economic sanctions on Japan, including an embargo on oil exports, which had a significant impact on Japan's war machine and further fueled the country's determination to secure vital resources through military means. The culmination of these events came on December 7, 1941, when Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, drawing the United States into World War II and triggering a series of rapid military advances by Japanese forces across the Pacific. The attack on Pearl Harbor resulted in the deaths of over 2,400 Americans and the destruction of much of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, propelling the United States into a total war footing and setting the stage for a protracted and bloody conflict in the Pacific theater. Japan's involvement in World War II was thus the culmination of a series of events driven by militarism, nationalism, and imperial ambitions that would have profound and lasting consequences for the country and the world at large. During the early to mid-20th century, Japan embarked on a campaign of aggressive expansion in Asia, seeking to establish itself as a dominant regional power. One interesting detail is that Japan's expansionist policies were driven by a combination of economic imperatives, strategic considerations, and a sense of nationalistic fervor. By the late 1930s, Japan had already annexed Korea and Manchuria and was eyeing further territories in Southeast Asia. One significant event was the signing of the Tripartite Pact in 1940 between Japan, Germany, and Italy, which solidified Japan's alignment with the Axis powers and signaled its intent to pursue territorial ambitions in the Asia-Pacific region. As a result of its expansionist policies, Japan occupied a vast swath of territory in Asia, including parts of China, Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines. The Japanese military employed brutal tactics to subjugate local populations and extract resources for its war machine, leading to widespread suffering and devastation. In terms of numbers and statistics, it is estimated that Japan's occupation of Southeast Asia resulted in the deaths of millions of civilians and the displacement of countless others. The infamous Bataan Death March in the Philippines, where thousands of American and Filipino prisoners of war were subjected to horrific conditions during a forced march, stands as a stark example of the brutality of Japan's imperial rule in the region. Japan's expansion in Asia not only had devastating human costs, but also had far-reaching geopolitical implications, setting the stage for a protracted and bloody conflict in the Pacific theater during World War II. On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, marking a turning point in World War II. The attack was meticulously planned and executed, catching the American forces off guard and inflicting heavy casualties. Interesting details include the use of midget submarines by the Japanese, which were small, stealthy vessels designed to sneak into harbors and launch torpedoes at enemy ships. These submarines played a key role in the initial stages of the attack, causing confusion and chaos among the defenders. Another interesting fact is that the Japanese pilots who carried out the attack were highly trained and experienced, having honed their skills in previous military campaigns in China and Southeast Asia. Their precision bombing and strafing runs devastated the American fleet, sinking or severely damaging 8 battleships and numerous other vessels. In terms of numbers and statistics, the attack on Pearl Harbor resulted in the deaths of over 2,400 Americans and the wounding of over 1,100 more. The USS Arizona, one of the battleships sunk during the attack, remains a poignant memorial to the lives lost that day, with the wreckage still visible beneath the waters of Pearl Harbor. The attack on Pearl Harbor galvanized the American public and led to the United States' entry into World War II, shifting the balance of power in the Pacific theater. The aftermath of the attack saw a wave of patriotism and unity sweep across the country as Americans rallied behind the war effort and vowed to avenge the lives lost at Pearl Harbor. The consequences of Japan's actions during World War II were far-reaching and had a profound impact on the country and the world at large. One interesting consequence was the devastation wrought upon Japan itself as a result of the war. The firebombing of Japanese cities by Allied forces, culminating in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of civilians and left a lasting scar on the national psyche. The bombings also had long-term health effects on survivors, leading to increased rates of cancer and other illnesses. Another interesting detail is the Tokyo War Crimes Trials, held in the aftermath of the war to prosecute Japanese military and political leaders for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The trials resulted in numerous convictions and death sentences, including for figures such as General Hideki Tojo, who was executed in 1948. In terms of numbers and statistics, it is estimated that the total number of Japanese military and civilian casualties during World War II exceeded 3 million, with millions more left homeless and displaced. The economic toll of the war was also staggering, with Japan's infrastructure and industrial base decimated by Allied bombing raids and naval blockades. The country's economy was in ruins, and its people faced widespread poverty and hardship in the immediate post-war years. The consequences of Japan's actions during World War II also extended to its relationships with other countries in the region and around the world. Japan's aggressive expansionist policies in Asia had alienated many of its neighbors and left a legacy of bitterness and resentment that persists to this day. The war also fundamentally altered Japan's position in the international community, leading to its occupation by Allied forces and the imposition of far-reaching political and social reforms aimed at demilitarizing and democratizing the country. The legacy of World War II continues to shape Japan's foreign policy and national identity, with the country's pacifist constitution and commitment to peace and reconciliation serving as a stark contrast to its militaristic past. The consequences of Japan's actions during World War II serve as a sobering reminder of the human cost of war and the importance of striving for peace and understanding in a world scarred by conflict. Following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, Japan faced a stark reality of defeat in World War II. Interesting details include Emperor Hirohito's unprecedented radio broadcast to the Japanese people on August 15, 1945, announcing Japan's surrender and calling for acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration. This marked the first time the Japanese public had heard the emperor's voice, as his divine status had previously been shielded from public view. The formal surrender ceremony took place on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, with representatives from the Allied powers and Japan signing the instrument of surrender. An interesting fact is that the signing ceremony was attended by General Douglas MacArthur, who oversaw the Allied occupation of Japan and played a key role in the country's post-war reconstruction. In terms of numbers and statistics, World War II resulted in an estimated total of over 70 million fatalities worldwide, with Japan alone suffering around 2.5 million military and civilian deaths. The war also left a devastating impact on Japan's economy, with widespread destruction of infrastructure and industry. The surrender of Japan marked the end of a brutal conflict that had ravaged the world and ushered in a new era of peace and reconstruction. The post-war period saw Japan undergo a period of profound transformation as the country sought to rebuild and reconcile its past actions. The legacy of World War II continues to shape Japan's national identity and its commitment to peace and reconciliation on the global stage. Following World War II, Japan embarked on a remarkable journey of rebuilding and recovery. One interesting detail is the role of the Allied occupation in overseeing Japan's reconstruction efforts, implementing democratic reforms, and dismantling the country's militaristic institutions. The post-war period also saw the emergence of a new constitution in Japan, which renounced war as a sovereign right and emphasized principles of democracy and human rights. In terms of numbers and statistics, Japan's economy experienced a rapid resurgence, with GDP growth averaging around 9% annually in the immediate post-war years. By the 1960s, Japan had emerged as a global economic powerhouse known for its technological innovation and export-driven industries. The country's remarkable transformation from war-torn ruins to economic prosperity stands as a testament to the resilience and determination of the Japanese people. The legacy of World War II in Japan is a complex and enduring one, with profound implications for the country's national identity and its place in the world. One interesting aspect is the ongoing debate in Japan over how to remember and commemorate the war, with differing views on issues such as war responsibility, historical revisionism, and the treatment of war criminals. Interesting numbers and statistics include the estimated total of over 2 million Japanese military personnel and civilians who lost their lives during the conflict, as well as the millions more who were left homeless and displaced. The legacy of World War II continues to shape Japan's relationships with its neighbors in Asia and its commitment to peace and reconciliation on the global stage. In the aftermath of World War II, Japan faced a period of profound transformation and rebuilding. Interesting details include the implementation of democratic reforms under the Allied occupation and the drafting of a new constitution that renounced war as a sovereign right. Japan's rapid economic resurgence in the post-war years is reflected in statistics showing an average GDP growth of around 9% annually. The country's emergence as a global economic powerhouse by the 1960s is a testament to the resilience and determination of the Japanese people. The legacy of World War II continues to shape Japan's national identity and its commitment to peace and reconciliation on the global stage.